The following is a recording of a live questions and answers session with Chris McCann that took place on Friday, February 14th, 2014.
Hello and welcome in to EBible Fellowship Questions and Answers Time, where you can interact with us with your questions and comments related to the Bible, and we'll try to respond as well as possible by going to the Bible. And so, with our Bibles at the ready, it's now time to turn things over to our speaker, Chris McCann. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to EBible Fellowship's Friday night question and answer program. Tonight, we're going to take a look at the Bible with any questions or comments that anyone may have, and each person is invited to share what's ever on your mind by contacting us in one of the ways that were just mentioned. I'll be happy to respond by turning our attention to the Bible. Well, we have a short time together tonight, so we're going to go to the first person on the phone. Welcome to our Friday night question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Good evening, Chris. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, very nice. Very happy to hear your voice. Chris, could you please read Psalm 83, verses 4, and then 14 and 15, please?
Psalm 83, verse 4. They have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance." And then, was that 14 and 15?
Yes.
Okay. As the fire burneth the wood, as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm.
In this verse, Psalm, I was reading with some people Psalm 83, and the attention focused on particularly on verse 4, which you read, and people I was talking to, we were discussing this Psalm, they felt that in light of the recent events happening in the Middle East, that this verse referred to them, to Israel of the Middle East. My response was that maybe this verse really refers to to a spiritual threat that the adversaries of God, the enemies of God, would bring to the faith of the true believer, not which is the spiritual Israel, not to the land of Israel. And then the other two verses he read, 14 and 15, they were saying, why do we pray to God to bring destruction to these people, especially from verse 13 to the end of Psalm 83. So I told him that maybe this means only that we should pray to God not for the destruction, but that God perhaps would frustrate the evil schemes of the people that are enemies of God, and I don't know.
Yeah,
This
you
was my
have the
answer.
right idea that this is not talking about national Israel when it says, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel be no more in remembrance, except as it may have had application in the days of the Old Testament." And there were attempts to cut off Israel from being a nation in that time, but really Israel of old typified the New Testament churches, and both Israel and the church are representatives of God's kingdom to the inhabitants of the world. And so this is expressing the desire of the enemies of the people of God. They desire that they would be cut off from being a nation, that they would not be, they would have no standing. They would have no place in this world if they were cut off. And that's the desire of the wicked people of the world. They want no place for God's people, for the true believers. And it goes on to say that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. They want it gone. This was Satan's desire. It was his pursuit all through history. He attempted to come against the people of God to destroy them. And so this is expressing that. And then further down, it says in verse 12, actually, we'd have to back up to get the context, but it's mentioning Oreb and Zeb, who were enemies of Israel. And then in verse 12, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. And then it says in 13, oh my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind, as the fire burneth a wood. So those that would be set against God and his kingdom, and that outward representation of the kingdom, Israel of old and the New Testament church in the New Testament era, God is here expressing, well, let them be destroyed, like fire burneth wood and so forth. But thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and may God preserve your health. Good night.
Well, thank you for calling and sharing these verses. And let's go to the next person on the phone. Welcome to our Friday night question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Yes, Chris, welcome back. It's good to hear you.
Thank you.
My question is, when we think of the Old Testament and the New Testament, we know that there had to be a testator, someone had to die, and I think I understand from the New Testament that would have been Christ. He was the one that had to die to fulfill, I guess I'm saying this right, to fulfill the New Testament. But for the Old Testament, the sacrifices of the animals, is that why they had to die? Were they fulfilling the? Were they sort of like the testator dying?
Well, the Old Testament sacrifices were all pointing to the death of Christ, and so we know that Jesus, when he entered into the world, was living a tableau. That is, he was making demonstration of what he had done from the foundation of the world, and yet, even though he entered into the world to make that manifest, yet the entire Old Testament period, the whole hundreds of years that Israel was involved in offering sacrifices, was also types and figures and demonstrations of that same thing. But to make it even clearer, Jesus came and entered into the human race to offer up himself, and so the sacrifices were teaching in types and figures or in parables, but then Christ or God wanted to make it much clearer, and that's what he did. He clarified what all those sacrifices were pointing to.
But am I making it clear? Maybe I'm not quite wording it right, but New Testament, testator must die. Christ died. So I'm saying Old Testament, testator, were the sacrificing of the animals fulfilling that death that of the testator in the Old Testament?
Well, the sacrifices were pointing to the same death of Christ in the New Testament. Everything points to one death from the foundation of the world. Everything else is just evidence pointing to that, whether animal sacrifices or Christ actually entering into the world. The Bible is one cohesive whole. And yes, God broke it up into testaments, but really the Bible is the giving of the gospel, or it is the revealing of the covenant, we could say. And so God began to reveal the covenant in types and figures, very mysterious, very shrouded, and it was not all that clear. And then we get to the New Testament era, and he clarifies it further. This is why we read in Hebrews chapter 8, it says, let's see, in verse 5, I'll start reading there. Who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount. But now has he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. For finding fault with them, he saith, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And here God is indicating the first covenant and the second covenant. The Old and the New Testament still had fault. He found fault with them, plural, because the Old Testament wasn't clear enough. So God gave the New Testament, and he solved several mysteries and statements early on in the Gospels. Behold, the Lamb of God, John the Baptist said of Jesus, that taketh away the sin of the world. That was a clarifying statement, yet not clear enough either. And so God had a plan at the end of time to unseal the scriptures during the Great Tribulation and to make many truths known that were not previously known. And that's what these verses are referring to. So the gospel of the Bible, the written record of Scripture, is really a record of information that mankind struggled with knowing and understanding. And so God increased the revelation to assist men to better understand, and yet he finally saved the final pieces of the puzzle for the end time which we're living in, when, as we know, he opened up a good deal of information concerning the end of the church age and Jesus dying from the foundation of the world and annihilation being the judgment of God and so forth.
Okay, thank you for that. But really quickly, just to sum up my query, so whether it's Old Testament, New Testament, testator being Christ, he was the one that had to die to fulfill that testament.
Yes, and remember again, he died as the testator from the foundation of the world. So that put into effect the testament from the very beginning. And that's why Noah could find grace in the eyes of the Lord, or Abraham could be saved, or David in the Old Testament, because they already had a testator.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for your questions. And let's go to the next person on the phone. Welcome to our Friday night question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Good evening. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Would you please read short portions of 3 verses, and then I have a comment?
Okay.
Could you please read first Revelation 4, verse 1, the very last part of that verse?
Revelation 4:1. I heard as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter.
Okay. And then please, Revelation 17, verse 1, the very last portion of that verse.
Revelation 17:1. I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters.
Yes, also the come hither.
Right, okay. Come hither, and I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters.
And last one, Revelation 21, verse 9, again, the last portion of the verse.
Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife.
The comment I would like to make, if you could get time sometime to take a look at it, each time that phrase, come hither or come up hither, is used, it seems like the Lord is showing them something or revealing something. And I wonder if sometime you could get a chance to try to tie it to Revelation 11, verse 12, where also come up hither is used. Do you think there's an association there where he's going to reveal
that's
something?
interesting that you are noticing this. We do know, or as we've looked at Revelation 11, where it speaks of those ascending up to heaven in a cloud and their enemies beholding them, that this is not the rapture. This is referring to ascending in salvation to be seated in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. And just as Jesus said to Nathanael that there would be angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man, and that represented the idea that once an individual became saved, they were transported into the heavenlies, but then commissioned to go forth with the gospel as a messenger. And we read of that verse in John 1. Yet now it's the end of the evangelization program. It's Judgment Day, which would be May 21, 2011. And so there's a great multitude that ascends up to heaven, but they do not descend because God's program of evangelization has ended. And so we're familiar with that, but that's interesting how this phrase that you're looking at, come up hither, is used in these places. And I'll try to take a look at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Well, thank you for calling, and let's go to our next caller. Welcome to our Friday night question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Good evening, Chris. Welcome back. Can we go to Daniel 9:25? Daniel 7, 9:25 and 26, and Revelation 5.
Excuse me, Daniel chapter 7?
Yes.
Daniel 7, verse 25.
Yes, and 26.
Okay. Daniel 7:25 says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, and times, and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end.
Okay, then Revelation 13, verse 5 and 7.
Revelation 13:5. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And verse 7, and was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations.
Okay, and the last one is back to Daniel 9:27.
9:27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate.
Yeah, okay. My question is, Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 talks about the same time, same period of time. And my question is, in Daniel 9:27, it says, in 1 week, in the midst of the week, which is the middle part of the week, which is 3.5 days. I was wondering, could we be in the last of the last 7?
Well, you're right, the Daniel 7, where it speaks of the one wearing out the saints of the Most High, is referring to Satan And Revelation 13 is a good companion chapter because that's describing Satan as the beast during his rule of the Great Tribulation. So these verses apply to the Great Tribulation. Now, you might have come here because the time, times, and the dividing of time, the 3.5, but that, and you're looking at the midst of the week, but the 3.5 or times and a half, it is really a figure that is used to apply to various periods of time. The context where this phrase is found will determine what actual time frame is in view. Here in Daniel 7:25, it's referring to the period of the Great Tribulation, which is also typified by 42 months, which, if you were to break that down, that could be looked at as 3.5 years. And so the 42 months and this times, and the dividing of time is a reference to the entire Great Tribulation period, which actually was 23 years in duration. And now Daniel 9, where it's referring to the midst of that last week, the 70th week, the midst of the week would have been at the cross, because Jesus's ministry was for 3.5 years. And Mr. Camping has written a good book, The 70 Weeks of Daniel 9, that lays this out. The midst of the week, Christ went to the cross, and that's why it speaks of a sacrifice and oblation to cease, because when Jesus went to the cross, all of the Old Testament sacrifices came to an end. They were all pointing to him. And then the last half of that week stretches the entire New Testament era. And this figure is picked up with the 1260 days in the book of Revelation, that the woman flees into the wilderness, the woman who brought forth the man-child. And the man-child was Jesus. And after bringing forth the man-child, she flees into the wilderness for 3.5 years. And now the question is, when exactly does that 3.5 conclude? Did it conclude with the church age? Did it conclude with the end of the Great Tribulation? Is it still in effect? And that's a question I'm not sure of the answer. But we can't look at this time period, I think, as the midst of the 70th week. That was at the cross.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you for those verses and for your question. And let's go to the next person on the phone. Welcome to our question and answer program tonight. Please go ahead with your call.
Hi, Chris. Like everybody mentioned tonight, it's nice to hear your voice. It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Could you read Genesis 8, 3 through 5, and then I'll ask my question?
Genesis 8, beginning in verse 3. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen.
Well, I guess I have two questions. I think my first question is, we know that the 17th day of the second month was May 21st, 2011. And in verse 4, when it talks about the ark resting in the 7th month, does that represent the spiritual 5 months that we're in right now? Like from the 17th day of the second month to the 7th?
I think, I don't know how to carry the spiritual picture through Genesis 8. So it's a little risky for us to do this, but I think since chapter 7 really spoke of the 150 days, that we're safe at least in understanding up to this point that the 5 months is a figure of the entire period of Judgment Day, just like the 5 months in Revelation chapter 9. And the ark rested in the 7th month on that 17th day of the month, which would be exactly 5 months later, 150 days later. And then the waters decreased. So this would be language pointing to the believers are in the ark, and the ark represents Christ. And so it has to do with God watching out for his people and protecting his people until the forces that are at work in this day of Judgment Day, which are typified by the waters, begin to recede.
Okay, because I was just wondering, I mean, I believe, the 1600 days, I mean, God's finger is in you. This is all, from the Bible. Nobody could put that together. And, I believe there is a very strong possibility that Christ will come next October. So you just wonder with the language here, like, does that mean that there's time beyond the 1600 days, with the waters decreasing until the 10th month?
That's why I said I can't carry it through this chapter. And we have to also, I think, realize that this chapter goes on to describe Noah and his family coming out of the ark, offering sacrifices. The account continues into chapter 9, and they begin to live upon the earth again. And at some point, the picture, as Mr. Camping used to talk about the Bible as portraits in a picture gallery, your portrait might be one verse, it might be a passage, it might be a whole chapter. But then the portrait concludes and you move to the next portrait. And so that's how I've been looking at this, that the picture is judgment. God is the one who picks out the language of 5 months to emphasize it here, and he's the one who emphasizes it in Revelation 9. And what's encouraging about October 7th, 2015, is that it is the 10,000th day of overall judgment. And that's encouraging because 10,000 is a very excellent number for completeness. And that's what we've been looking for. When will God complete the judgment? The judgment began at the house of God. We know the judgment on the churches were 8,400 days. Then we were looking for a complete judgment, and we initially thought it would be literally 5 months. But 8,400 days plus 153 days, that number is what, 8553? And that number in itself doesn't point to anything. But when we add 1,600 days, it completes, it fills in perfectly 8,400, or complements it perfectly, and we have 10,000 days. So I would be surprised if the judgment continues to 10,001 and 10,002, then we're in another area altogether. It would seem that 10,000 would be the finish.
Right, I agree, Chris. Thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you for calling and sharing those verses and your question. And let's see, I think we have a question from Pal Talk. Is the little season or a little while a time of the Great Tribulation from 1988 to 2011? Yes, the little season, and we can call it this because the Bible does. In Revelation 20, let's see, it says in verse 3, and speaking of Jesus casting Satan into a bottomless pit, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled or finished. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. And the figurative 1,000 years came when the church age ended in May of 1988. And then Satan was loosed. He had been bound at the cross, but at that point he was loosed for the little season, also known as the Great Tribulation. And verse 7 of Revelation 20 says, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. And so he was loosed and began to rule as the beast for 42 months, or there's many different figures that God uses, but it all refers to the 23-year period from May 21, 1988 until May 21, 2011. Then the little season ended. Now, we recently learned in the Gospel of John, in John chapter 7 and in verse 33, then said Jesus unto them, yet a little while am I with you. Now, the two English words, little while, are a translation of the same two Greek words translated as little season in Revelation 20, verse 3. Therefore, we can understand it to be a reference to the Great Tribulation. And Jesus is saying, yet a little season am I with you, and then I go unto him that sent me. And that matches very well with what we learn took place after the Great Tribulation. Christ was with us a little season. He saved a great multitude. Then he went unto him that sent him, the Father. And then verse 34 says, ye shall seek me and shall not find me. And where I am, thither ye cannot come. And that applies to this time period after the little season, when many will seek death and not find it. They will knock at the door and God will not open. And this context in John 7 leads right up to verse 37 that mentions the last day, the great day of the feast. And that would point to the last day of Tabernacles, which October 7th in 2015 happens to be. And that last day of Tabernacles is also that 10,000th day of overall judgment. But thank you for your question. And I would like to thank everyone for sharing your questions and your comments, and especially the Bible verses we had an opportunity to read and to consider. But we have come to the end of our time tonight. Please join with us, Lord willing, this coming Sunday during our online fellowship for another live question and answer program. And also, Lord willing, Sunday evening on Facebook, we'll have a 2-hour text question and answer time in our Sunday open Q&A group. But for now, I'll say good night, and may the Lord's perfect will be done.
And thanks for joining us again for EBible Fellowship's Questions and Answers Time with your speaker, Chris McCann. You can join us for these questions and answers sessions Sunday afternoon following Sunday studies and Monday and Friday evenings following the Monday and Friday evening studies. Until next time, may the Lord's perfect will be done.